you, Ryszard. So we can now progress to taking questions from the floor. Can I just make 3 polite requests in this regard? Number 1, when posing your question, could you please give us your name and affiliation? Number 2, could you please specify whether your question is for the panel as a whole or for a particular member of the panel? And thirdly, could questions please be brief as possible, because we want as many questions as we can from the floor. So opening it up to
I'm Jeremy Phelps, I'm the Director of International Detention Coalition. Thank you for some really stimulating presentations. Great to hear a focus on the politics, the practicalities of implementation, and moving us beyond this slightly sterile question of whether it's legally binding, and as that, which brings the assumption that the GCM is a question for lawyers rather than for all of us. Particularly wanted to pick up on the focus on the wide range of stakeholders that are foreseen in the compact, and how that, what ideas the panel, perhaps particularly institutions, but the panel in general, have around how those stakeholders can be mobilised to engage with implementation, to see the compact as something that's theirs and not just lawyers or states, particularly in this very difficult political context. I'm thinking in particular around the role of cities that was mentioned, and migrants organisations who haven't been so involved. And in this context, the UN network is a key process in that. Great here that it's addressing the silos within the UN, but it will also need to, the wider process will also need to break down the barriers between UN agencies in general and civil society, other stakeholders. Ideas on that would be very interesting.
whoever wishes.
Okay. To be quite frank, I think that the GCM again can be used by us as saying, okay, we are realizing that we need to have a broader range of engagement. As I said, I think we're only now sort of realizing that we need to work closer with the private sector, with local government. And one thing is if we sit and talk about that at policy level, at headquarters level. Another thing is to say to the people who are actually, for our people, implementing the field. And for that, again, I think the GCM is very good because it's mentioning these stakeholders. So we can say, look, you need, from a very practical perspective, we need to report now, partially GCM, partially SDG, and partially our own internal framework, which is the Migration Governance Framework. Luckily, and I have to say from experience within the UN, luckily those three actually speak together and fit together, because we could have 3 instruments or 3 documents which went in completely different directions. Luckily we don't. The thing is that for us, it's a good tool to tell our field officers and the UN country teams, if you want to have meaningful implementation of this, these are the stakeholders that you need to systematically involve, and you need to report back to us whether or not you're actually doing it. So I think that from our perspective, it's a question that's awareness raising for our officers to reach out to potential, let's say, unconventional partners. And in that process, and also making those unconventional partners more aware of the fact that there is this framework that they can base their operations on, their policies on.
Sorry.
I want to say something to that. One of the things that when we started to pay attention to the Global Compact and what was going on, we ended up with a little agglomeration that was interdisciplinary from a number of universities, in Europe mainly, but we had some Canadians who were involved. And we meet about every 6 weeks and talk through what we think we should do next and whatever. One of the examples I was going to give on this is that some of our members got very excited about the local authorities. So we had the seminar for local authorities, and then there was a second seminar in Birmingham a couple of weeks ago on this. And the colleague, the academic colleague who was very keen on this, quite rapidly came back to the next meeting and she said, oh my God, You know, I mean, it's so complicated. I've spent hours calling up local authorities all across the UK. We were talking this year, we said, well, you know, actually this isn't an academic job. What you need to do is hand this over now. Now there's interest, and the local authorities are saying, yes, we can do this, but we need the money. Where's the money for us to do this implementation of outreach, etc.? Well, you need to hand this over. We need to hand it over to the Association of Local Authorities in the UK. And then somebody said, oh yeah, and they've got, you know, a little working group on migration. And so it was an outreach to hand it over. And the same thing happened in respect of this handbook. You know, we said, well, we're not practitioners. We have to hand this over. We can, you know, try and encourage, as academics, we can try and encourage various parts of civil society to take an interest in this. But we can't do everything. Our job is not to do that for them. And I think that this will also have to happen within the trade unions, within, you know, all of these different groups. You know, to one of the meetings we invited the faith-based organizations. And some of them turned up, but as soon as they turned up, you know, and they started to talk about their approach, we thought, you know, we as academics in law, but also in political science, we didn't have anybody from theology faculty. We thought, well, you know, I mean, they're going to have to do it themselves. But it's getting the word out there. There's a role for everyone. And because the state, the central state, has given civil society and all these other organizations this role, then the central state is obliged to support that. And I think that is, for a lot of organizations which are, you know, hand to mouth in terms of funding, this is a way to say, well, actually, you told us we have to do this in the compact. You voted for this. You know, would you mind now giving us the resources so that we can do this for you?
Yes, just two very quick points. I mean, because you referred to the network, right? And the network actually has in terms of reference, but I don't know whether it's public yet or not. It should be public at some point. But interestingly, you know, in terms of reference, actually obliges the network to engage with external partners, and lists all those partners which are in that compact provision which Elspeth listed. But to what extent, how that engagement will work is still a question mark, I think, because firstly the network is a UN network, so it is just open to UN agencies, and I listed, you know, the 8 in the executive committee, but I understand that there are now, in terms of, you know, it has 38 members, right? So, but they're all UN agencies. So how this core group will engage with these external partners, this is still a question. And secondly, because it has to be more than just lip service. And secondly, the network will have these working groups, and there appears to be more scope for more sort of organic engagement with some other partners, to the extent that these partners will be members of the groups. And the second point, you know, obviously at the national level, engagement of this list is still a huge challenge. You know, I mean, in my region, I've been to meetings where, for example, UN agencies are invited, international NGOs are invited, but the few NGOs that exist working on the ground on the core issues are excluded from the discussion because they're in sort of tension with the government authorities, and so you know, the reality on the ground is very different when it comes to GCM implementation.
Vincent, do you want to add?
No, I mean, that's clearly, maybe just as a supplement, but clearly there is also a need for a bottom-up approach from the civil society, because clearly politicians are disastrous, and we are well aware about that here, and the mass media are simply unable to understand what is the reality of migration, clearly, because I mean, the image of amazing floods and so on is just a job for all experts in migration. So clearly, the change has come from the civil society at large, because in the current political debate, the other options are very limited.
Okay, thank you. I've received 4 questions, so if I do it in the order that I received them. So, first of all, first at the back, secondly, number 3, and number 4. Okay, so hopefully we'll get through all 4. So, first of all, question at the back.
Thank you all of you for interesting speeches, but I have a question to Professor Guild, if possible, concerning the 2016 EU Migration Partnership Framework, which indeed, as pointed out by commentators, use development as a leverage for stemming migration. Can you see a similar risk with the global compact on migration?
Do you want to take all 4 questions?
Okay. First, question 2.
Yeah, I'm Sheila York from University of Kent Law Clinic. That's the, what would you call it, the Independent Republic of UKIP. And so I'm occasionally on the BBC Radio Kent. Why is it not a crisis? A dinghy with 6 migrants lands on the beach. Sadly, Joey said. Really, what I want to ask is, given that the UK has declared all migrants who haven't got permanent residence to be precarious, and we have the hostile environment with huge fees for people who want to settle in the UK, and which makes lots of people become unlawful because they can't afford them. And we've got a lack of Home Office legal conscientiousness, culture of disbelief that was exhibited in the detention report. The fact that the state has signed up to this compact, I don't think is going to make any difference. And my question is to the panel, don't we think the real job is how can we build democratic solidarity amongst the UK electorate for solidarity with migrants, respect for migrants, support for migrants, whether lawful or unlawful, and so on. In other words, what we started to see with the Windrush crisis, we started to see a slight sympathy with how migrants are treated, and should we really be developing that?
Thank you. If Elspeth, if you did the first question, because I think that was good. Could I maybe have a volunteer at the panel to deal with the second question there? Is there something you'd like to? Okay, thanks, Christine. Question number 3.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I'm Shahid Mosley. I'm doing a PhD in politics at the University of Leicester. I'm sure I'm a student here. But my question is very much about the right-based approach, and this is probably better be addressed to Kristina, because in your argument, you said that right-based approach is probably the only way that we can go forward with the GCM. Sorry. And as a result of this, don't you think it's not very realistic to deal with the issues, especially with the challenges that's coming now with Brexit and so on in the UK and the global migration crisis in general in the Northern Hemisphere? So this is what I'm dealing with in my research is about integration. So it's not very practical and realistic aim. And this leads
So what is not a practical, realistic way?
to have a wide-based approach to the GCM. And this is related somehow to the thing that Vincent mentioned earlier. This is another question to my partner with. To what is the added value that you mentioned if it's not really legally binding mechanism? So what is exactly the added value that the GCM will provide for governments in relation to implementation?
Thank you. And finally, and perhaps so that all of our panel are contributing in the questions, would it be okay if the final question is directed to Vincent and Ryszard? Would that be? Okay?
Yeah, I was actually going to direct it to Professor Chetail.
Perfect timing. Thank you.
My name is Gillian. I'm a PhD student at Queen's University in Belfast. My research is focused on international refugee law, so very public international law approach. And I'm just curious, I mean, you obviously mentioned that it's a soft-law instrument and it's a restatement of a lot of existing international law, but I'm just curious of yours or anyone else's thoughts on the role of the GCM in sort of statement of or development of customary international law as opposed to treaty law, and maybe its effectiveness in that way, if you could speak to that. Thank you.
Thank you. So So we've got 4 questions. I think that will probably be as many as we can cope with because time is passing. So perhaps if we start with the answer questions.
Yes, Anna. The EU Migration Agenda 2016, what a disaster that was. And moving on to the Trust Fund for Africa, this whole idea that you can pay states money to keep their citizens from exercising their right to leave the state. And that is a very flawed approach. And of course, it's proved extremely problematic. If the EU thought that it could be more cynical than some of the not particularly democratic leaders in some countries, in particularly North Africa, if they thought they could out-cynical them, they're getting the surprise of their life, and they're discovering, as they found with Gaddafi, that once you invest huge amounts of political capital into an agreement with an undemocratic leader who is not interested in human rights, on the migration front, keep them from coming. What you do is you make yourself a hostage to that leader, saying, well, I'll turn on the tap if you don't give me more money. And you see this arising in the discussions on dishing out the money in the Trust Fund for Africa, that a number of states, I will not name names, are saying, well, what we need is not, bunches of money now and then to prevent migration, but we need a steady stream. We need a permanent income stream to pay for all of the infrastructure, i.e. our salaries and topping up our Swiss bank accounts for this purpose. So I think that the EU migration agenda has been a disaster. The Trust Fund for Africa has placed us in the position of, in Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg, we're a vassal region to perhaps unscrupulous political actors elsewhere, and has done nothing to except inflame xenophobic temperament in Europe. So all round a lose-lose scenario.
Thank you. Thank you. If we move on to question 2, which is the question relating to building democratic solidarity with migrants.
I think it really is a question of getting the discourse back to something that's at least slightly more facts-based. And to be quite honest, I don't even think it's a question of solidarity with migrants. I think that it's a question of having a better communication and what we're all risking if we allow this sort of treatment of a certain group of people to continue. Changing perceptions, saying it's not only a question of respecting rights for the sake of the people who have their rights violated, but for the sake of society. What are we doing to societies if we have people allowing abuse, exploitation, and talking about what migrants actually bring to societies, but also not only having a discourse that says, okay, these guys are saying that migration is bad, we want to say that migration is good, but bring migration back to the proportion that it should actually have in the political discourse. Because these days, people vote on migration issues. People who are absolutely not touched by migration issues. Nobody is holding their politicians accountable for school reform, for healthcare reform, for fiscal reform, for agricultural reform. Everybody is voting on let's either stop migration or allow migration. For Mr. Smith, Signor Rossi and Monsieur Dupont, at the end of the day, these 6 migrants arriving on the shores is not going to change their lives, but they are being fed. And to your question, I don't see an alternative to having a rights-based approach. If we are all human beings, we all have rights. The moment we don't have a rights-based approach, then how are we going to implement both the SDGs and the GCM in any meaningful way? The SDGs and the GCM are tools to promote rights unless we buy into the discourse that is, anyhow, it's not legally binding, so sort of is taking away from the instruments we have. We need to stand strong and say the instruments we have are the basis for the implementation of these two instruments, and these two instruments are helping us in furthering development, it's furthering a leave no one behind agenda, and it's furthering the rights of migrants. It's a tool of implementation. It's nothing else and it's nothing more, but it's also nothing less. And honestly, if we say that we can't have a rights-based approach, well, again, then we're just saying, okay, let's go back to societies where we have little Oliver Twists running around the streets, because then we are just giving up, not on migrants, but on ourselves and on our own human rights. So I cannot see an alternative that is going to bring us anywhere, unless it's the Third World War. And with that, I think Twitter, that happy no Twitter, take it on.
No, I like the question actually, because you said, what is the added value of the compact if it's not legally binding, right? And I think that's a very pertinent question, because of course we do have a system within international law. You know, we have the human rights treaties, the labour standards that are backed up by a supervisory system, right? Where you know, states have made legally binding commitments, and they're subject to this system in terms of it showing whether or not they're implementing what they're committed themselves to. And when you look at the implementation mechanisms for the compact, I think compared relative to that system, they are weak. About a couple of years before the compact, Francois Crapeau, who will be speaking later this afternoon, right, by Skype, who's former Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of Migrants, came up with a proposed compact, effectively, with indicators, with timelines, and this has not been taken on board in relation to the compact that we have now. And even when we talk about the actional, so-called actional commitments, if you read the text, they list the objective, and then the compact says, to realise the commitment, we will draw from the following actions. So it's sort of an a la carte menu. It doesn't mean that all the actions are relevant, even if, for example, those actions wouldn't require changes in the rules and regulations at the national level. So compared with this system, this is a valid question, I think, and to what extent the compact can truly assist and be implemented on the ground without a robust supervisory or some kind of review mechanism. There is a review mechanism, but again, it's not, that states will be able to report to this international migration review that will take place every 4 years, also every 4 years at the regional level, but there is, often the supervisory systems in relation to human rights and labour standards are criticised for being weak and with no teeth, and clearly when we put the compact alongside those, something very similar can be said with regard to review of the compact.
Yeah, I just think we also might now have a tendency to think that, okay, GCM is going to change the world. If instead we say this is something that has been given us that we can use in a certain way or not, well then it becomes something that we can say, do we want to insist on this being implemented with a rights-based approach? And as you said, it's not only for lawyers. This is something we can use to tell other people how to implement rights. Or do we want to buy into a discourse saying, this is not legally binding, and therefore it's a threat to the legally binding instruments? The legally binding instruments are there. States are duty bearers and have to live up to their obligations under the legally binding instruments. How do we then, can we not say this is a way of using the GCM, is to say we insist on this being done? We have a responsibility in that way, I think.
Okay, if we move to the final question.
And also in link with the added value of the GCM, because clearly the added value is fundamentally political in three main areas, as mentioned also before. First of all, the Global Compact provides a common understanding among UN member states. And now they have something they are on to have a common understanding of the key issues. And I mean, take the time to read it. The acknowledgement that most migrants are used to live and travel safely and regularly, contrary to the impressions that there is an invasion of undocumented migrants. So this is important, first, as a common understanding. Second, it provides a common framework for future actions. So clearly, this is, of course, a prospective approach, but clearly there is now a framework to guide future actions among UN member states. And more fundamentally, the third aspect is the Global Compact is a counter-narrative to populism. If you look at the objective on the media, on the all-encompassing approach, and so on, this is, of course, I mean, national sovereignty is mentioned, but clearly this is an endorsement of the shared responsibilities among all UN member states, an endorsement that all states are countries of transit, departure, and destinations. So clearly, it works as a counter-narrative to populism and a way to develop further multilateralism. And from a legal perspective regarding the question, no, clearly, I mean, what is interesting is the restatement of some fundamental and basic principles. These principles are already binding, but I mean, states apparently are not always aware about their own duties. So restating them, of course, I mean, this is not comprehensive. This is not an exhaustive list of all binding rules, but the most relevant ones are restated in a clear-cut manner. So, unfortunately, for lawyers, I mean, this does not break new grounds, but for states, apparently, they need this kind of restatement. And there are several principles restated in the Global Compact that are clearly today part of customary international law. The prohibition of collective expulsion is clearly part of customary international law. Of course, the principle of non-discrimination, the prohibition of arbitrary detention, the best interest of the child, and so on. So there are many rules, principles that are restated in the Global Compacts that are part of customary international law, and also, of course, grounded on well-ratified conventions. So, but again, as a whole, the main added value of the Global Compact is not legal. This is a tool to change the current narrative of populism and a way to have a more balanced approach of migration. But of course, there are legal aspects and restating the duty to respect for international law is clearly important today, and focusing on some of the most important rules, detention, children, and so on, is clearly important.
Thank you. Doubtlessly we've lots more questions to ask, but perhaps we could discuss them over coffee, which leaves me to thank the four fantastic speakers for their topical, interesting and very thought-provoking papers. Thank you very much.